Hello everybody. This week we're working on Unit 3, and as I was telling the people here in class before I hit record, this is one of our more important chapters in the book, because this is where we start talking about some of the fundamental concepts of object-oriented programming. And Java is an object-oriented programming language, and I know I mentioned this in some of our earlier sessions, but here we actually start to use these tools to build applications. Now, one thing that they're doing is they're also jumping in and talking about methods, and you guys might be familiar with methods from working in other languages where people call them functions or subroutines or something of that nature. So a lot of that terminology is interchangeable, but in an object-oriented language, the proper term is a method. And the reason it gets lumped in with objects and classes is because as you start to build objects and classes, those objects and classes can have their own methods, and then knowing the correct syntax to access and utilize those things is really what kind of unlocks Java for you. At least in my mind, that when I got the concept of, oh, I have a class, I got an object, I can call the method within that, it's like magic. Now, I know that it might not pop into focus immediately as you're working on this, and that's okay. There's lots of excellent resources out on the internet that you can go and read about objects and classes. Maybe somebody says it in a better way than I do, or says it from a different perspective, and it'll come into view a little bit better. But I am going to be following the textbook directly. I've opted not to do the PowerPoint route because I want to talk about the concepts and then demonstrate them by the virtue of doing the You Do It exercises. So really what I'm helping you do is complete the first one of your assignments. The other thing I mentioned here in class is that, because I know some people are working off the 7th edition of the text, I'm going to be providing the PDFs for the 8th edition's exercises to make sure you're doing the right exercise. Because not all the exercises are identical. They're similar in some little adjustments, but we're working from that. The assignments and the unit in general here, we're going to have 2 batches of assignments. These are the first 2 assignments. They're going to be due roughly 10 days from now. So it's Thursday night when I'm recording this, and they're going to be due, the You Do It's are due next, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, and the exercise is the following Sunday. So not a week from now, a week and add a few days.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it says like June 12th.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, never mind. This is due tomorrow. I'm sorry. All right. So hopefully you guys have already started on this. I apologize. But the following batch of exercises is due the next week. Now, part of the rationale for that is you need to be in the mindset. And my online students, who are probably the ones listening to this, are more in that mindset where there's a little bit of that self-study approach. And it really requires that you sit down and read the book. And if you're not getting it out of the book, look up the topic online. Lots of great materials about Java. If you run into problems coding, Google what your issue is. Google what your error is, and chances are you'll find it. But I want you walking into the classroom or into working on these things, having done a little bit of advanced study, so you're not in the situation where you're trying to complete it at the last second. Now, I'm hoping that we can get far enough today that we can actually work on some of these exercises here in the classroom, and I anticipate that to be the case. And once again, just to show you the problem-solving approach. So we'll try to find a balance between the You Do It's and the actual exercises. All right, so let's dig into the material. Oh, the other thing I want to mention is that this unit does extend over 2 weeks, and there's a second set of exercises that will be due in the subsequent week, just so you guys are ready for that. All right, I'm going to bring up the book now, and you can see that Chapter 3 deals with 3 very important concepts: methods, classes, and objects. Foundations of the Java language. All right, these are the topics for the chapter. I've mimicked those inside of our course shell I'm going to read those. We're going to learn some cool new terminology. Maybe you've heard some of the methodology, perhaps not. And the first terminology we're going to learn is the word method. And now I was mentioning just a short while ago that when we talk about methods in Java, we're referring to what other languages typically will call functions or subroutines. And I know we get like the VB programming in this program. I'm not a huge fan of VB. I speak out against it, I guess. Not that it's a bad language or you can't do stuff with it, but it's atypical structure-wise to other languages. It's kind of its own oddball thing. And in VB, you will have the subroutines that do whatever they do, and then you have functions which do whatever they do and then return a value. In Java, you just have methods and they can do either one. In other languages, they typically call them functions, lower level languages like Java, for example. But in the high level languages, the general rule, any of them that are object oriented and have class structures or namespace structures, they will have methods. Okay. A method can typically be identified just by virtue of the fact that there's a set of parentheses following it. Methods, in essence, take a group of statements and bundle them together. You put curly brackets around it. So we've been using the main method since the beginning, because if you want to execute code automatically, the code's got to be inside the main method in order to execute. So what you're going to see here is the part in black. That's the name of the method. The main method, of course, is one that's built into Java, right? It's not one that we are creating manually. Well, we're coding it manually, but what it does is built into the Java language structure. And then inside the parentheses might be blank, or they might contain what we call arguments. And arguments are what we send to a method or the method receives in order to perform certain tasks. So for example, if you were to write a method that performed a calculation, that method might require that you send it some numbers in order to execute. Other times you're going to write a method whose only job is to put stuff on the screen, in which case maybe you won't send it anything. So it depends. But in general, when you want to execute a method, you need to call it by name with the parentheses with whatever arguments it requires. Okay? And they're throwing a lot of terminology in here, and I'm kind of giving you my condensed version. But you can see that here, if you want to execute a method, you invoke or call it. And that's a common mistake I see, is people will write the method in their code, and it's like, it's not working. Well, you wrote the method, but you have to still call it. All right, so you call it by name, and then it will execute. All right. Now, here's an example of calling a method. So we're inside the main method, and we're kind of ignoring the main method at this point. We're looking at what's inside. And what's inside, the first statement is display address and parentheses, semicolon. What that's indicating to us is that somewhere there is a method that's called display address that does something. And by virtue of placing it there in that form of a statement, it shall execute. So I'm hoping that a little farther down here, they demonstrate that, and perhaps not. But I guess in this little spot here, what they're showing you is that the main method will execute automatically regardless of where it's placed inside the class. When you do console applications, the general practice is that the main method sits at the top. When you start to do GUI applications, then you'll see that you'll tend to put the main method at the bottom, because its only job will be to get everything running, and that happens at the end. Okay. Either way it would work, just so you know, but that's just kind of like development conventions, I guess is a good way to say it. But the little highlights here indicate that really you can place the methods anywhere you want. The program will find them, as long as they're named properly, as long as you're calling it properly. When you are creating methods, naming is important. Now, we don't have to begin a method like we do a class with a capital letter. It can be any combination, but there are some limitations as to what characters you can use. Like, for example, you don't want to start with a number. All right. So let's take a look here. This is more the example I'm thinking of. So we have our program, we got the main method, and then we have this call to display address. And notice that just below, sitting outside of the main method, so it sits independent, still inside the class, we have a method called display address. Display address does not need to receive anything, that's why the parentheses are blank, but it executes a series of system out print lines. So in essence, whenever I issue this command in the main method, it executes these three statements. Now, one thing that you're going to find as well is that you're going to start slowly figuring out what public static void means. And we'll learn that one piece at a time. Generally speaking, public indicates that any other part of the program can access that method. Okay, so that can be pretty important, right? If you want to execute it, that it's accessible. The other one that we're concerned with initially is void, and void essentially tells us that we are not returning any values. If we are going to return a value, then we would replace void with whatever the data type is that we're sending back. So if I was to return an integer, it would be public static int display address. Okay. All right. Now he's going through some of the stuff I've already mentioned, so I'm going to kind of jump over some of it, but you can see that he's pointing out much of what I said. Yeah, all right, so he's talking about the method header, and that's this part. So optional access specifiers are return type, I told you that, an identifier, that's the name, and the parentheses, and those are all required except for the very first part of it. So you can actually skip the public and it would still work. It's kind of odd. The other thing that you guys should know too is when you're writing a class file, our practice, the proper practice, is to say public in front of it. But you can remove public and it still works. So you can just say class first and it understands it. All right. So here's got a little breakdown telling you much the same thing I was. Let's talk about the static since he's got it highlighted here. It says static modifier means that these methods do not require an object to be created. That's kind of weird because we haven't talked about objects yet, but try to keep that in the back of your head. So we don't need to create an object relative to this method. It just does what it does. And 90% of the time that's going to be the case for us. I did mention where void goes. That would be what we call the return type. And when we say void, nothing is being returned. Talks about the naming conventions. What's legal, what's not. This sort of naming convention that you see here is, as you know, I said in my sentence just now, it is a convention that people tend to describe what it does. Logical words start with capital letters. Do not have to do it that way, but it's highly recommended that you're verbose with your method names and that they provide some sort of information. So when you look at it, what does display address do? It would be different if I called it, hi. It wouldn't make much sense. So if you can name it what it does, then when you do your program flow, it's a lot easier to see. All right, so when you're working with the parentheses, as we mentioned, that's the part that either can be filled with something or not be filled with something. So I think at this point what would be good to do is let's go ahead and try to create this little first you do it. Everybody say hi to Jay. Hi, Jay. Who's joining us on Hangouts tonight. And I'm going to put that offer out there for all you onliners watching this, that if you want to remote in and watch or see my screen live in action as we're doing the class, you're always welcome to. Okay, I'm going to bring up Eclipse to do my work today. Don't have to use Eclipse. You could still use JGrasp if you wish. If some of you have tried NetBeans, that's fine too. If you've also prefer to work Notepad++ in the command line, that's fine too. Doesn't matter. But I am going to use Eclipse for the tool because it does help to accelerate certain development tasks. So we'll get the software running here. I get the book up on the screen. All right, so we're going to build the basic structure of a program here. So we're going to build a class. Paradise Info is what we're going to name it. And I'm here in Eclipse. I'm going to go ahead and close all my previous work here. And in Eclipse, the thing that you always want to do is when you're working on a fresh problem, it's a good idea to do a new project. Now, do you have to do it that way? No. You could actually do one project and have multiple files inside of it. So if you wanted to do a project that was all the chapter exercises, that would work too. That's really kind of up to you. But for what we're doing here, I'm going to choose to create a new project for each exercise. So, what chapter is this? Chapter 3. I'm going to do YDI, you do it, 1. And I'm going to click Finish and let it create a little project node here on the side. And then I'm going to right-click on the project node and then create a new class file. And we are going to call this Paradise Info, is that correct? It's amazing how quickly you forget. And then I'm going to go ahead and create the public static void main. So really, just with those couple of clicks, we've already completed the first couple steps here. So we completed the creation of the class, we added the main method, and now we are going to put in a method call inside the main method named display info. All right, now Eclipse is going to underline this because it's going to realize that we don't have it, right? And you're going to see that the next set of instructions here is to create it and the code that goes inside it. But I want you to start leveraging some of the tools that Eclipse offers you. And notice when I was hovering over it, it says, the method display info is undefined for the type Paradise Info. One quick fix available, create method display info. So why not? Right? See how easy that was? And you know the advantage of doing it that way? No typos. No typos. So I like that. So even if you're copy pasting from the source code that comes with the book, you might find that this is a better way to work. Because you might, mess up a character or something. This ensures that you're okay. The next thing that we're going to do is these system out print lines that says, Paradise Day Spa wants to pamper you. We will make you look good. So let's do that. System out print line. You can see I'm doing a little copy paste here to get myself started. We will make you look good. And the truth is what we're printing in there isn't as important as the concept that we're about to show. So we created the main method. We're doing a method call. So the program launches. It'll do whatever inside the main method, and that's going to call on this particular method to execute. It will execute, and then it'll move on to whatever the next step is, which is nothing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click the little play button here, and then you guys will see, yes, please save and launch. And you'll see at the bottom that it did exactly what I asked it to do. All right. So hopefully you got a couple of important takeaways from that. Basically seeing how it works. And now we're going to do something that's even more interesting. And I'm hoping that this will unlock a little bit of a door for you as well. The next thing that we're going to do is what it indicates here. And I'm going to take a quick pause because my mouse battery just gave out on me. Okay. All right. So the point here is that we are now going to create another class file, and then we're going to call the method that we just created from a different class file. You're going to see how this works. This is actually quite cool. So we're going to create a new file inside the same project. So I'm going to come up here to the source folder and right-click, do another new class, and we are going to call this, what are we calling it? Test. I suppose it doesn't really matter too much. Test info. Yes, we're going to put a main method in it. All right, and there's our file. One thing I do want to make mention of, when you're starting to work in an IDE, I don't know if you guys have noticed at the very top of the file how Eclipse threw in a package statement. That is basically an equivalent of what we do in Visual Studio, where we have a solution file. It just kind of indicates that these things are bundled together. I do not need to have that present. Does it make it? No. Not for what we're doing at this point. It's just, it basically is a way of bundling certain components together, and that way you can refer to them. So in other words, if I were to go ahead and remove this, I would want to do it from all the other files as well. Okay. You want to leave it? Leave it. You want me to delete it? Delete it. You know what? Let's delete it. I think that's probably actually a better practice because the book's not doing it, right? All right. You can see I saved them both. Now it's hollering at me because I removed it. You see that? All right. And then you get into this little fiasco here where you have to go in and you have to change the package information. But watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to just run this. And I just want to show you that it points out that it doesn't have it present. So it doesn't really know what to do without it. So the trick then becomes that basically when you're creating the project, and you want to be really careful when you're, I'm just going to throw in a name just for sake of example. And then you go to add a file or class. It's at this point that you're asked to put in a package name, in which case you can delete it. I'm sorry? Yeah, I would, for this point in your development skills, I think it's generally a better practice to leave it blank. But you can see the compiler's yelling at me. I'm just going to go ahead and just do a Control-Z on both of them because I really don't want to go through the fix right now. If that's okay with you guys. And we'll do a save all. All right. So just ignore that it's there, basically. All right. Now what we're going to do is follow the example in the book, and notice that they're going to do a little system out saying that we're calling a method from another class. So let's do that. Hopefully you guys can read that up on the screen okay. Here, let's indent this in. And now what I'm going to do, watch the syntax here. What's our other class called? I'm putting in a dot. You notice what it's doing, how it's like digging in and it's finding the resources that are available in this other file. Now I'm going to go ahead and, what do we call it? Now let's take a look here at display info. And notice that right now there's a little bit of a problem. And I know that in the You Do It, they talk about this. Or perhaps they don't. But notice when I created mine how it was listed as private as opposed to public. You guys notice that? And how did that happen? Because I automatically let it generate. So what happens with it set to private, this other class will not be able to access it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change it to public. And then when I come back over to this program, see, you get the underline went away, but you can see that if I was like typing this out again, and I got to the point where I hit the dot, now it recognizes that that method is available. Isn't that cool? So we're just going to double click it and it drops in. So conceptually what's going to happen in this program, which is a separate class file, is it's going to run, it's going to do our system out print line, then it's going to look for this class, which hopefully is in the same folder, or in the same project, or in the same package, and then run the method inside of it named display info. So isn't that cool? So you can call the file, dot, the method, and it executes. So it doesn't even have to be in the same file. And that's a lot of like what we're seeing as we're coding, system.out.println. Can you see kind of what's happening there? So, and you'll start to recognize that. Let's go ahead and run it, make sure it works. Works great. All right. Now, one thing that they have you do often in this book is go to the Java libraries that are available from Oracle to look things up. And you might not be in the practice of doing that, but you might want to start getting into the habit of it. One thing that I'll tell you that's cool about Eclipse is when you start like hovering over key terms, they pull a lot of that info directly into the IDE. So you can like look stuff up, like, oh, okay, so let's see, this is based on PrintStream. What does PrintStream do? Well, let's see. Gosh, right inside the environment, it jumps out to the Oracle website and pulls down the documentation. How cool is that? Right? So those of you that are working on this assignment and want to get that information, that it says at the bottom that you do it, there you go. Now, I know there's a little bit more to this assignment where they're starting to do stuff with JOption pane. You guys can do that on your own. All right. Let's now talk about parameters and arguments. And parameters and arguments are in essence the same thing. It's just a matter of perspective as to how you look at the terminology. So when we are sending information somewhere, we are sending arguments. If we are receiving the information inside the method, they're parameters. If you get confused by the terminology, just say you're passing a value. I'll get what you mean. Okay. But you'll hear those, and sometimes people confuse those two terms. But that's, arguments are what you're sending, parameters are what you're receiving. Now, one of the reasons that people use this sort of approach, for example, why would it be necessary to do this? We really, we're just outputting 2 lines of text. Why do we need to hide it? And that's really what this concept of implementation hiding is about. Does it really matter that we know how it gets its job done? Right? It makes it easier to code. You kind of already know what it does, And if somebody's using that method, so you can conceptualize this, you could write a class file that's got like 50 methods in it that all do specific little things. And if you know what those things are and you name them well, this one displays the address. This one allows the user to input a phone number. This one, and then you just call upon it and it just does it. So, and at the same time, you could, let's say, share that file with somebody and they can operate it without really needing to know what's going on underneath the hood. So that's why we call it implementation hiding. It's not that we want to keep it secret. It's just that, do we really need to know those details? It just works, right? Okay. So there you go. All right. Now they start to go through the process of showing you how to pass parameters. And the really important part here, here's a little example of some code. Somebody wrote a method here to predict somebody's raise. And notice that inside the parentheses, this method is going to accept a parameter. Remember, look at the perspective now. It's going to receive a parameter. But in order to receive it, you also have to list the data type that's coming in. It's kind of like doing a variable declaration on the fly. All right, so whatever happens, whatever number we send to this, it's got to be a double in order for it to work. Can't send a string in. Okay. So this is going to receive a value. That value ends up here. No, I'm sorry. This doesn't end up there. But they're declaring another double inside here. So wherever, this is already named. So in other words, in this method, this is like a variable declaration that would exist here. So in other words, the word salary, or the variable salary, can be used directly. So the value comes in, and then wherever salary is, in that exact form, here and here, it's going to utilize whatever value we're passing in. So if I'm passing in $1 million, that's my salary, right? Then that will be used in calculations. And additionally, any method can have its own little structure within it with whatever you're doing. So it's going to receive the value, we declare a new one, we have a constant, we do some math, we store it, we do an output. Okay, so that's receiving one parameter. Now it goes through and it demonstrates to you as well the type of values that you could send in. So if I was calling the method external to the method, so in other words, I was in my main method and I want to run predict raise, predict raise needs to have that parameter coming in. So I will pass to it the argument that could either be a literally coded number, a literal value, like, so for example, what you see here, predict raise, and I type in the number 1000. That will work. And any of these other ones will work as well. And it's interesting that you can use an integer, you can use a number with a decimal, you can do a calculation, you can send in a constant, you can send in a variable. Any of those approaches work, as long as the data type will work where you're sending it to. Now, you guys should know from your little experimentations that when you work with numbers, an integer can very easily be cast to a double. So pretty much anything that's numeric, for the most part, will work going in, as long as you don't exceed the capabilities of that number structure. So if I was to use like a byte and I was sending in 1,000,000, it's not going to work. But no, that's something you're going to need to know as a programmer. The other real interesting thing, and this might be a little bit of a mind bender initially, is that you can pass to it a different method. Youch, right? You get fire some new neural pathways in your brain there. And what would happen then, you could predict that this other method does something and returns a value, and then that value ends up in that spot. All right, and we're going to talk about returning values in just a moment, if that's confusing. The one point that the author was making there as well, that I kind of glossed over just as I scroll by, is when you are declaring any variables or constants that are inside of a method, they are isolated to that method inside those curly braces. Okay? They're not accessible to the whole program. The method is accessible to the program, but not the stuff inside of it. It operates independently. Yes, that's called variable scope, very much so. So those variables that are inside the method are scoped to that method alone. All right, so now we kind of ramp up the example a little bit. Now we're looking at passing in multiple parameters, and notice the format. You always have to list the data type and then give it a name. Always have to list the data type and give it a name. Now, if you're going to send in, let's say, any sort of a variable, let's say instead of sending in, like going back to this little example here, let's scroll a little faster, right here. All right, and then the example where, my mouse is totally misbehaving here, with that second last blue bullet where we're sending in a variable, do you notice what the variable name is? My salary. And then when we get back down to the method that we're passing it to, notice that the names don't match. That's okay. They don't have to match. In fact, it's considered better practice if they don't match. However, if you did name it the same thing, it's not a problem. It's considered better practice, though. All right, so if you're passing in multiple parameters, very much the same kind of things apply. Notice here an example of a method they created called compute commission, and that compute commission requires three values. One is an int, one is a double, and one is a character. And then in the main method above, you'll notice that in one instance, we're sending in variables as arguments. So in other words, value is equivalent to 23,000. Character V-type is S. And then a double for the commission rate, which is a decimal number. Those can be assigned to variables, and then the variables can be passed by variable name. And that's probably what you'll see most commonly. However, what's important to note is the order in which the variables are listed in the method definition. So this second blue section here, notice int goes first, double goes second, and character goes third. I can't change the order at will, and it will not figure it out. It has to be passed in the order that it requires to do the work. So it's assuming that an integer is first, a double is second, and a character is third. Okay? I'm going to pause here for just a moment. All right, we took a little brief pause here, watched a little Flight of the Conchords, and I fixed my mystery mouse problem, but we're back at it. All right, so remember the important takeaway here is that whatever the data types are of the parameters that are being received, that's the order in which the arguments need to be passed. Data types have to match. That's very important. The next thing that we're going to be moving into here in terms of methods is the concept of returning values. And Java's a little different in the form of how it declares that. Now, those of you that only know VB and have only taken that as a class for programming, you should have learned that when you have a function, at the very end of the function call, you have a little thing that says what type you're returning, integer, string, or whatever. Here we do some similar stuff, and that is we will have a return statement. So there'll be a thing that says return and whatever it is that you're returning. But then you also need to make some adjustments to the method structure itself, so wherever you're defining it. So notice, you remember I mentioned void indicates we're returning nothing, but if I'm returning something, then I indicate what that data type is here. Now the stuff that's going in, just so you know this, does not need to match what's going out. You could send in a string and return an integer. Okay, they don't have to match. It really depends on what the method's doing. That's going to determine what's going on. So the data type that you are going to return, though, you got to remember this, when you're going to be returning something from a method, it has to have somewhere to go. And then the place where you're putting it has to match data types as well. You're going to see that in just a moment here. So here they got a little method that's going to receive a double, the salary, and then it's going to do some math with all of it, and at the very bottom it's going to return new amount, which is a double. So it's going to send back a double. Now in the spot that we're calling it from, and that's this example here, look at the right side of that setup. The assignment statement on the right side says predict salary. We're sending in some sort of a value. It's going to go off to that method, do whatever work it does, and then it's going to hit that return statement. It's going to send back a value. But if I did not have this assignment statement, it would have nowhere to go. So when you're returning a value, it has to have somewhere to go. It's going to do its work. It's returning a number. Where am I going with it? It's going right here. That might be one thing that throws you a little bit when you get started, but it's okay. You'll get it. What kind of things can you return? You can return all sorts of things. Numbers, strings, various number formats. You can return variables. You can even return other methods, which is kind of weird, but you can do that. All right. Notice another thing that you can do that's kind of cool is you can actually dynamically throw something in, even into a system out statement, where, for example, here they're saying new salary is, we run the method, right, and we're going to concatenate the results of that method onto that string. So what does predict raise do? It takes whatever the variable is, my salary, sends it off, does the math, returns a value, and whatever that value is, new salary is, and it prints it out. And you can do that all in one fell swoop. That's okay. You can do that, absolutely. Not a problem. In fact, you can even take it a step further, and this is an approach that I often use, where I declare a variable that's going to hold the value. So you're declaring it as a double. We're assigning to it the result of whatever the function, or excuse me, the method returns, minus something else. So you can run it, subtract a different value, and assign it in a variable you're declaring on the fly. So think of all the stuff that's going on just in one statement. And as you become a little bit more advanced with your skills, you're going to find yourself truncating things like that and doing it in one fell swoop statement instead of spelling it all out. Do you have to do it that way? No. If you're more comfortable doing it piece by piece, do it, declare the variable, then run the method and store it, then do the math with it. Do it like that. That's okay. But it's just to show you that you can do it all at once. It's a nice way to work. All right. Another thing that they're going to point out here, it's another important concept, is what we call chaining method calls. So here's, we've already been doing it, because whenever we want a program to run in Java, we have to do it from the main method. And the main method is calling other methods. So that's what chaining is, in essence. So can I use the main method to call a method that calls a method that calls a method? Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit in terms of logic, but not so much. If you structure things, it's not a big deal. All right, they have a couple more examples here where we have a method that's created, and calculate bonus has two different possible versions. And notice what the second one does. It's got a tricky, not a regular calculation, a tricky one. Now, this is what's kind of weird, and we haven't really talked about this concept yet, but what happens is you are able in Java to write a method that can accept various levels of arguments or parameters depending on your perspective. So I can write something with one name that receives no arguments. I can write one that receives 2 arguments, or write one that receives 3 arguments, all of which have the same name. And that's kind of deep, because it's not something you see in other languages very commonly. And that's called overloading. And really what you're doing is the program itself will figure out, well, you're sending in 1, so you want to use this version. You're sending in 3, so we're going to use this version, and it dynamically adjusts. So we'll show you how that works too at some point. All right, let's go ahead and write this one. It says open the Paradise Info, and then change the name to Paradise Info 2. So let's go ahead and do that. So just go ahead and drop a 2 here, and then just do a save as. It should pick up the name hopefully automatically, and it's not. So let's drop it in. See how easy that was, right? Okay. And then let's follow the next set of instructions here. They want us to import the scanner, and they want us to declare these variables here. So we have a double of price, discount, and savings. Now I'm going to use a little bit of a shortcut technique here. And I just want to make sure I'm putting them in the right spot, so I'm sorry that I'm jumping screens here really quick. They want us to put the import statement in, so let's go ahead and do that. Import Java util scanner. And that's going to go right up here. Except scanner's got to be capital. All right, and it's recognizing it's not being used yet. That's what we're seeing here. And then we're going to declare our variables: price, discount, and savings. Now watch how I'm going to prefer to do this. I'm assuming this needs to be in the main method. Somebody read it and tell me if I'm wrong. Was price, discount, and what? Savings. Notice I'm just declaring them all at once. I can list them each separately. And either approach is fine, but you can do this sort of statement as well. So I'm not assigning any values, I got 3 doubles: price, discount, savings, all done. All right, and then we're also going to run our scanner. And in this case, scanner, they're calling it keyboard, so let's just follow suit. Are you guys starting to memorize these statements yet? A little bit? All right, now they're making a point here that if you wanted to use the J option paint approach to do the graphical input, you could. I'm not really worried about it at this point. All right, next statement is system out print. Since I can't copy from this weird ebook format, I'm actually going to jump into my source files here. I just want to save a little bit of typing. You guys are going to think this is cheating because I have all the answers for everything right here.
If you use the 7th edition, then you do it so you do the same.
They should be really close.
Yeah.
If that's a really good question though, Hayden. If you are using the 7th edition to do the udoits, I really don't care that there's a variation between the books.
Really easy ones, but the
Yeah.
exercises you want done from your PDF that you gave us.
Yes, the exercises should be done from the 8th edition PDF, absolutely. All right, so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to save a boatload of typing. All right, it's not cheating. It's just I'm copying and pasting from a more efficient. I'm copying and pasting from somewhere that works. In the past, you know, I would have the book as a PDF, and it's very simple to copy and paste from there. But for whatever reason, this ebook reader does not let me do that. It's very finicky. So we're going to add these two scanner lines here to our code, and I'm just going to drop those in. Make a little space. All right, so we have a prompt and our cutoff price, and then we grab that from the keyboard. Enter discount rate as a whole number, we grab that from the keyboard, and both of those are stored, price and discount. Let's follow the next step. It says, after the call to display info, insert a call to compute discount, and we haven't built that yet, but we're going to find that line here. So they want us to put display info right where my cursor is, so I'm just going to delete that into place here. I may as well clean up our code a little bit. All right, so now we're going to drop in this statement, and I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab all of those and then just talk about them. That would probably be more efficient. So in this case, we have that variable that we created, savings, and we're going to run a method that we have not yet created called compute discount info, which will receive two values. We're going to be passing two values, price and discount. We are then going to do some output statements, and it says special this week on any service over whatever the price is, discount of whatever the discount is, and then it says that's a savings of at least whatever that calculated value is. So you can see what's happening in this particular statement is we're going to send two values off to a method, and apparently it's going to return a value because we're setting that equivalent, or not equivalent, but we're assigning the value to savings. So it's going to return a value, it needs somewhere to go with it. All right. All right, and then they're giving us the code for compute discount info, so I'm just going to come over to my source file here and grab it. And I'm going to put this below display info. It doesn't really matter technically where you put it. Oh, except I grabbed the wrong one, didn't I? Display info twice.
Yeah, that's why there's two of them there.
I grabbed the right stuff. All right. So here's a compute discount info. Notice how it's set up. They have two doubles that it's receiving. One double is PR, I guess that's for price, and one is for discount, and you can see how they changed the names. That's considered good practice. Right. And those are coming in. We declare another variable inside of the method. We do a little math with all of them, and then we return savings. Now here's kind of a weird thing, because what are we calling it out here? Yeah, it's not a problem actually. And really the guy's doing it for sake of example because they're isolated from each other. All right, and I think that's the bulk of the program here. I don't think there's anything else much to it, at least at this point. So let's go ahead and save our work and run it. Remember, when you hit play, that's exactly what it does. It saves, it debugs, compiles, and runs. All right, so we need to enter a cutoff price for the discount. 25. Enter the discount rate as a whole number. 20. You notice what it's doing now. It's going through each one of the statements. This is basically anything that's inside our main method is kind of the roadmap for the application. So it's going to declare the variables, set up the scanner, prompt for 2 values, display info, that's the part that we did originally. Then it's going to generate a value and place it inside of savings, and then it's going to output all the information. And if you look at what happened down here, you can see that's exactly the case. So special this week on any service over 25, discount of 20%. That's an average of at least $5. Yeah. Yay. Now you remember last time we learned how to do the formatting for currency. If you wanted to do that, you could. That's really not a big deal here. Some people get really picky about it. We want to get the program to work. We'll worry about the details later. All right. Once again, they're going to have you go out and look up what PrintStream does. If you guys are curious, please go examine it. But for all intents and purposes, the lecture for this week is complete. Our focus this week is methods. Next week, we're going to go to objects and classes. And now we're going to turn our attention to the homework. So let's go ahead and get ready to do that. So get your IDE all set, and this video ends here.